Hello, here is a quick mini lesson on these guys. Now a clause is a group of words that contains a subject and a verb. Clauses fall into one of two categories, independent and dependent. An independent clause can stand on its own as a sentence, but a dependent clause cannot. Here are some examples of both kinds of clauses. Each of these three sentences contains an independent clause. Here are the verbs, and here are the subjects. Each sentence contains one independent clause. Dependent clauses still contain verbs, and they still contain subjects, but they cannot stand on their own as sentences. They are what we call fragments. So now you know about the two different kinds of clauses, you'll be able to understand the different kinds of sentences that are available to you. A simple sentence contains one independent clause. A compound sentence contains two or more independent clauses connected by coordinating conjunctions, often remembered with the acronym FANBOYS, or they're connected with semicolons. A complex sentence contains an independent clause and at least one dependent clause, and these clauses are usually connected by subordinate conjunctions. Here are some examples of these three different kinds of sentences. As we learned earlier, simple sentences contain one independent clause and no dependent clauses. They contain verbs and subjects, and they can stand on their own as sentences. Compound sentences are made up of at least two independent clauses and no dependent clauses. Let's take a look at the first one in a bit more detail here. I am going to the movie, but my brother is staying home. Now this sentence contains two main independent clauses. First of all, you have I am going to the movie, and then you have my brother is staying home. Now each of those could stand on their own as a sentence. I am going to the movie, my brother is staying home. But in this case they've been connected by a conjunction, one of the coordinating conjunctions, in this case but. Together they form a compound sentence. Same thing is happening in the second sentence. James passed his driving exam. That is one main clause, independent clause, and he is going to pick us up later is another independent clause. In this case they are connected with the coordinating conjunction and, which makes it a compound sentence. And then finally, you can take this now or you can pick it up later, follows the same principle. Now the independent clauses that exist in compound sentences are not always connected with coordinating conjunctions. You can sometimes use a semicolon. Take a look here. I'm going to the movie, semicolon, my brother is staying home. That's one sentence. It's got two main clauses in it and it's connected with a piece of punctuation, which is a semicolon. The final kind of sentence we're going to look at today is a complex sentence. Let's take our time with the first example here. I am leaving now because it is getting late. Let's first of all find some verbs. You've got one verb here, is getting, and you have am leaving. Two verbs. Look for some subjects. It is one subject and I is another. I am leaving now is an independent clause. It could stand on its own as a sentence. Because it is getting late, however, is a fragment. It cannot stand on its own as a sentence. Because it is getting late doesn't make any sense on its own. Therefore, because we have one independent clause and one dependent clause, this is what is known as a complex sentence. Let's do the same with the sentence number 2. Although it was raining hard, we still continued working in the garden. Let's find the verbs. Continued working, was raining, and the subjects, we and it. Now, we still continued working in the garden could stand on its own as a sentence, which means that's the independent clause. However, although it was raining hard cannot stand on its own as a sentence, even though it's a clause. It's a dependent clause. And together, because we have one independent clause and one dependent clause, we have what is known as another complex sentence. In the final sentence here, we have two clauses. One is an independent clause, I watched the film, And the second is a dependent clause, that was playing in my town's theatre. I watched the film Could Stand on Its Own, that was playing in my town's theatre is a fragment, that's the dependent clause. But together they form a complex sentence. So let's summarise what we've done in the last 5 minutes. We've learned about clauses. Independent clauses can stand on their own as sentences, but dependent clauses cannot. Simple sentences contain one independent clause but no dependent clauses. Compound sentences contain at least two independent clauses and they're usually connected with fanboys or sometimes with semicolon. And complex sentences contain one independent clause and at least one dependent clause. They're usually connected with subordinate conjunctions. If you are still having some trouble with clauses and sentences, listen to this screencast again or go and find one of your English teachers.